Proportional Response. Book 1, Chapter 17, Part 3, Lying in Blood. Kasler sat, his face carefully neutral, and wept inwardly at the untold death and destruction he saw before the League Worlds. In his mind, blood flowed from the Prime Minister's pulpit as Jalad finally spoke again. "My first action as acting Prime Minister is to level charges of a gross League Charter violation against the humans." She paused for effect, obviously expecting some sort of dramatic reaction to her charge. All she got was a little nervous shuffling. Her countenance stayed neutral, but Kasler could see the tip of her tail twitch slightly in agitation as she continued. "The humans have built a number of massive ships which could only be construed as interminable weapons of mass destruction. I am forwarding you the proof of their treachery. The size and tonnage of these massive ships they have built can serve no other purpose than platforms for planetary subjugation, and they have built enough to potentially subdue everyone in the League. I warn you that the recording you are about to see will be disturbing to many of our less martially inclined ambassadors, but I must insist that all of you bear witness. Republic forces encountered one of these Leviathan ships from the enigmatic Project Phoenix they have been so secretive about, and managed to destroy it despite great loss of life on our part, and only due to the technological edge we still hold over the humans. Pay close attention to the sensor readouts, my fellow sapiens, and consider what the firepower hidden in that raw tonnage could do to any of your worlds." The lights dimmed, and the open air of the council chamber filled with a hologram that looked almost like the one Kasler had seen the night before. No, not almost. It had been altered heavily. The image of the ship, the same one that had fled human space before Henry's forces, had been doctored. It appeared to bristle with weapons. The rest of the hologram had been altered as well. The display showed an order of magnitude more Zoltan ships converging on the vessel than had truly been there, and the official Zoltan documentation codes were different. A message from Euro floated in space before him, displayed on the contacts he wore so she could send him messages that the Zoltans couldn't intercept. The date on that document code resolves to less than an hour ago, and specifies that it was entered into their codex manually, not that it is the actual telemetry from the warship. We aren't supposed to be able to decipher that part of the hash, but I know how. I can also detect some visual artifacts where they doctored the doc codes. Proving this is a fake will be easy, even without the real copies Henry has." Kasler casually scratched his neck and gave his wife a sign that he understood. The video began to play, and a human-sounding voice filled the chamber. "Zoltan Fleet, this is the warship Little Pie. You have scans of our weapons and capabilities. We are on a mission from our government, and will not allow you to interfere. Get out of the way or else." A pair of brilliant beams of light shot from the warship, both of them striking the one cruiser that Kasler knew had actually been destroyed in the engagement. As that ship disintegrated under the energy of the beam, the fake human voice then came back on. "That was a warning shot. You Zoltan scum. Stand aside or be destroyed." Fury gripped Kasler as the commander for the Zoltan fleet responded with pleas that the human be reasonable and stand down from an illegal engagement. The little pony responded by opening fire again, and the fight began. Kasler tried to calm himself by looking for errors in the doctored footage. A perspective wrong here, a battleship turning like a frigate there, lighting on another ship being off somewhere else. The battle proceeded rapidly, and the human ship, while under fire no less, spat forth several warships, then moved out to engage the Zoltan fleet. That part is not a total fabrication. The human ship did, in fact, send out those warships. It was almost laughably easy, having seen the real footage, to pick out the real Zoltan ships, the ones which made short work of the poorly handled human warships from the ones which never actually existed. The human warships lasted far longer in this fictional version of events, and it only took a few moments for him to realize that 3 times as many of them boiled out of the mothership than had really existed. He did some back-of-the-hand volume calculations, as the real human ships were destroyed in the opening salvo, as things had actually happened, and the fictional human ships traded heavy fire with the fictional Zoltan ships. He finished his mental math as the last of the fictional ships faded from the video. There would hardly be room in that mothership for the kind of engines required to move so much mass, much less the sort of weapons that could mete out the damage seen in this video. Sloppy. Jalat! Just sloppy! The majority of the fictional Sultan warships had been destroyed, and all fire was concentrated on the Little Pony. The Sultan ships just couldn't seem to do enough damage to stop it, however. They are drawing this out. The real engagement lasted half this much time. Once the warships were dealt with, that Phoenix ship buckled like a civilian ship under military fire. At last an order came from the Sultan Admiral, calling for a ship's captain to volunteer. A somewhat flowery response came from the one remaining fictional Sultan ship, and Kazler felt his eyebrows rise as the ship made a suicide plunge into the heart of the Little Pony. The display froze shortly after the moment of impact, showing the two doomed ships crumpling around one another. The hologram faded and the lights came up. Jalat spoke into the stillness. Thousands of Sultans lost their lives yesterday trying to protect you, my fellow members of the Council, and the sovereignty of your nations. There is one last matter I must convey to all of you before I call for judgment upon the humans. Jalat pointed an imperious finger, claw extended, towards Henry. I see some of you looking towards that treacherous hairless ape as if you expect him to say something. He cannot and will not. I will not permit such a being as him to speak. He has swayed this council far too many times with his naked threats of violence and his sweetness-coated lies, and I will no longer allow his rounded tongue to lead you astray. Just rest comfortably in the knowledge that, when this session is over, and we have confirmed the necessary course of action, he will be arrested and led away in chains. Now, to the proof of the humans' depravity. We obtained these documents through extensive intelligence efforts, putting even more Zoltan lives on the line to protect you. It is because of these documents that we knew the path of that massive weapon of war, and were able to stand in its path. Kazlor's holoscreen flashed with a document. He waved a hand to open it, and saw another doctored Zoltan document code, though this one had been messed with quite expertly. The document claimed to be a set of orders from the Confederation Military Command, instructing the Little Pony to proceed to the Findle homeworld and kill or enslave every sapient being on the planet, then start the slaves building colonies for human expansion. She can't possibly expect anyone to believe this. I can spot at least 2 spelling errors just by glancing at it. Humans never allow that sort of thing in official documentation. He looked up at her and saw a hard, nearly snarling Zoltan face with slightly red-tinged eyes staring back at him. It took an effort of will not to snarl back at her and lean forward in challenge. Instead, he simply held himself still and raised a single eyebrow at her. She deepened her snarl a moment and moved on to try and intimidate someone else. Avoiding and preventing exactly this sort of thing is the reason that the Venter joined this league in the first place. But that was partly appeasement. The Emperor back then knew it. I've seen his most private notes, just as my sister has. The only way he could have formed this league to be what it claims to be would have been through a sea of blood. The fact that the sea will be shallower with these humans at the point of the spear does not mean it won't be a bloodbath. He resisted the urge to shake his head. Part of me wants to blame Henry, to wish he'd stayed to the original plan, but that would have been foolish. The Zoltans would have pushed a war eventually, and may have forced some of these others to help them besides. My sister and I thought we could prevent that mountain of death, but the humans knew better. We traded that sea of blood back then for a slow, steady stream of it through the ages. Which pool is deeper? The one that would have been had we fought, or the slow bleeding inflicted by the Zoltans since? She swept her eyes through the chamber, and most of the ambassadors recoiled at her red-tinged gaze. She finally spoke in a low, gravely voice. You see now how dangerous these humans are, and what they plan. There is, and can only be, one response to this sort of predation. The Zoltan Republic calls for expulsion of the human ambassador from this council and a vote of exterminata against the humans. A collective gasp went up from a few council members, but clearly not as many as Jalat expected. Her gaze, furious, swept the chamber, clearly expecting to see ambassadors on their feet and calling for a war of annihilation against humanity. Instead, she saw a bunch of seated ambassadors with crossed limbs and guarded looks. She is even more delusional than we thought. She clearly expected to see the majority of the council behind her, as has happened before when a Deathworld species managed to escape the net of Kenfestration and had to be exterminated after they joined the council. She and her contemporaries are nowhere near the equal of their predecessors who orchestrated those events. However, and those predecessors didn't have to deal with humanity. Hells! Who am I kidding? Kazlor had to work to keep his face passive as Jalat continued with great passion. My ambassadors, my fellow sapients, an exterminatus has been called. You are required by the Charter to take up arms and provide material support against a tangible threat to the welfare of all sapient life. The Zoltan Republic has been patient and forbearing of your insolence for far too long, ambassadors, and will tolerate no defiance in this, and no shirking of your duties to the Council. Any nation which does not join in this conflict will be branded an enemy of the Republic, and dealt with accordingly. Still, no one moved. No one reached for a console to signal agreement. Kazla began to take a closer look at what he saw, however, and his heart nearly skipped a beat. She was succeeding in scaring them. Too long. We have lived in fear of these creatures for far too long, and that fear has grown out of all proportion with reality. I know this. I have known, but have never seen it in action, and have never wanted to admit it to myself. Henry, whatever you are going to do, you had best do it soon. Jalat leaned forward and spoke in even harsher tones. How can you just sit there? This evidence. The lights went out in the council chamber, and Jalat's mic went dead. Kazla could hear, even from his position at the top of the chamber, Jalat roar in frustration. Henry's voice boomed through the chamber. It's a complete and total fabrication, and I have had enough. Humanity has had enough. You can shut up, Jalat, and you can quit trying to force your controls to respond. Silence fell in the chamber, and Kazla could hear a platform undocking from the wall.